Hello, my name is Tricia Pistone, and I'm presenting a case analysis presentation based on the Columbia's Final Mission, a multimedia case study. Designed for both public and nonprofit managers, I'll be presenting on practical lessons of organizational leadership and management that can be learned from the Columbia disaster. Peter Drucker, father of management theory, once said, "Management is about human beings. Its task is to make people capable of joint performance, to make their strengths effective and their weaknesses irrelevant." In the case of the Columbia STS-107 shuttle mission, the culture that existed within NASA did not build upon the idea of joint performance, and therefore allowed weak points to materialize within the agency. As you'll hear in a minute, NASA failed to create an environment that empowered individual responsibility and reward teamwork. While we'll never change what happened on that fateful day in 2003, understanding what went wrong can be important lessons for the field of public management, not just NASA alone. To start, it's necessary to provide a brief summary of the technical conditions that contributed to the disaster. The shuttle mission STS-107 was the 113th mission in the Space Shuttle program and Columbia's 28th trip into space. The more than 24 missions spanned 22 years. The STS-107 was a science-based research mission, and after its launch, there were to be 6 more missions scheduled to fly before February 19, 2004, which was a planned launch to mark the completion of the United States' share of the International Space Station. The Columbia 107 had been delayed for a number of years because it was a science-based mission, and missions to construct the International Space Station took precedence. Early delays in the International Space Station effort forced pressure on the remaining scheduled missions, including that of the Columbia. The mission launch from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida was on January 16, 2003. It was supposed to be a 15-day space orbit to conduct various research-based experiments in concert with other international space and research efforts. Foam shedding was observed from an external tank 81 seconds after launch. While this issue in the end was the smoking gun, it was never fully addressed during the 15 days of the mission. On February 1, 2013, the Columbia STS-107 shuttle experienced an in-flight breakup upon re-entry that caused the shuttle to disintegrate and kill all 7 crew members, including the first Israeli astronaut. While we have never known if there were other scenarios available to NASA that could have saved the mission, no effort was made to change course, and the shuttle was allowed to re-enter the atmosphere. Immediately after the incident, NASA set up the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, known as CABE, a 13-member board commissioned to conduct an independent investigation into the loss of the Space Shuttle Columbia. According to the CABE report, the working theory of the mission failure stated that prior to solid rocket booster separation, Columbia's left wing leading edge suffered a debris impact from a piece of foam that broke off the structure. The damage in the left wing provided a pathway for hot gas to enter the wing and structure during the entry. This resulted in significant damage to the left wing and the subsequent loss of vehicle control, leading to aerodynamic breakup. So how did this happen, and who let it happen? The bottom line was that the foam strike that occurred at launch was not escalated appropriately due to 2 major factors. First, initially there was no knowledge of the extent of the damage. And second, assumptions were made by management that the damage was considered acceptable based on prior history of other foam strikes. We now know the rest: a total destruction of the shuttle and 7 astronauts killed. Secondary impact included NASA's budget and ongoing mission schedule being called into question by both Congress and the public. The CAP Review Committee raised additional concerns as contributing factors. Those include, first, NASA leadership, upon pressure from Congress, held the mission management team to a demanding shuttle schedule. A new NASA administrator, Sean O'Keefe, was focused on addressing the historical delays in the mission schedule and the corresponding budget concerns. Second, blind spots existed among mission management team managers due to critical, unfiltered information never reaching the appropriate decision makers. Specifically, details of the foam strike were not reported in a timely fashion to management. In addition, 2 independent teams were unable to access the necessary video and imagery necessary to make proper diagnoses. Due to unclear communication channels, both internally and externally, requests for additional imagery was not prioritized and finally canceled. And third, management did not believe that there were any other option by the time of reentry. While known early in the mission that there were potentially something wrong, it was not escalated until it became too late for management to do anything prior to reentry. In the end, all these technical and management issues contributed to the Columbia disaster. Many of the organizational and management issues can be attributed to communication breakdowns within a complex environment. As the CABE report found, the need to communicate effectively between the individuals and organizations involved in the shuttle program were to be paramount, given the technology and risks involved. While specific to the Columbia disaster, the CABE report included a number of recommendations that are applicable to a broader set of public agencies and the managers that work for them. We're going to focus the rest of our talk today on the following three areas. First, the importance of mission-driven organizations. Second, the importance of clear communication channels and protocol. And third, the role of ethics and individual responsibility. At the core of every public organization should be a mission to further advance societal good. In the example of NASA, its mission in 2003 was to understand and protect our home planet, to explore the universe in search for life, and to inspire the next generation of explorers. While certainly a lofty goal, it was firmly rooted to advance the public good. However, pressure existed both internally and externally within NASA that served as competing forces. Those competing forces included schedule demands. As I previously mentioned, the strict and aggressive schedule developed by Administrator O'Keefe contributed to the pressure on the mission management team to keep the launch on schedule and focused on forecasting needs for next launch instead of focusing on the task of the current mission. The second had to do with budget conditions. The schedule demands were mostly the result of congressional and administrative budget pressures in order to fit within federal fiscal years. Third, the contractual requirements and expectations. NASA had contract relationships with private sector and other governments for payloads. Some academics have warned that when market values enter the civic space, they may push out societal norms and values and change the character of societal practices. One could make the case that this happened here. The competing pressures on NASA resulted in a failure to prioritize safety. It is important for any public managers to understand and assess changing pressures in order to maintain an unwavering focus on the agency's mission and its related value system. With regard to communication, there are three areas I'm going to focus on here. One is regarding subformal communication. Second, the clarity in language and the use of jargon. And third, the need to avoid blind spots. First, we need to understand the communication networks in order to reduce subformal communication that can lead to distortion. If you think of the human nervous system, billions of neurons need to find their way through small and large pathways. Similarly, subformal and formal pathways of communication exist and become more complex depending on the size and service delivery of an organization. American sociologist Merton, when researching administrative theory, stated that public managers will not be able to predict what will happen, but rather identify what are the significant variables, information, actors, events, and signals that should be paid attention to when making decisions within a complex environment. Ideally, good management is the process of addressing specific problems in ways that do not require the sacrifice of other organizational goals. In the case of NASA, management structures and communication channels were not clear and precise in order to allow for escalations to find a fluid path from the bottom to the top of the chain of command. Much of the information that should have been received by the mission management team was either distorted or dropped along its path. While some level of distortion is inevitable, public managers must consider workarounds to address it, such as setting up duplicate channels as checks and balance protocols. With regard to the need to improve communication, according to American academic Charles Lindbaum, the application of successive limited comparisons method allows managers to find agreement on policy. In the case of NASA, occurrences involving foam strike being acceptable, even when values, such as the velocity and location of strikes, were not agreed upon. As the CAB report noted, the expansion of definitions such as out of or in family with regard to inconsistencies added a level of abstraction to each issue and therefore reduced the attention that each issue deserved. Due to the complexity within NASA program, it was necessary for the agency to review and update protocols in order to address employee behaviors and use of jargon to underemphasize differences in favor of similarities, especially in critical communications. Next is avoiding blind spots. As noted by writings by Carol Lewis and Charles Gilman, the organizational habitat of public managers affects decision-making, action, and ethical analysis. The ecology features implicit norms, values, routines, decisions, and pressures for obedience and loyalty. To these are added explicit policies, procedures, and routines. The CAB report detailed how mission management team failed to pay attention to the foam strike information, serves as a textbook example of trained incapacity, referring to the actions based on training and skills that have been successful in the past, but may result in inappropriate responses under changing considerations. The inability for the chairperson of the team, for example, to be flexible in her management of the situation based on a different set of conditions contributed to the disaster. Public managers should be aware of how blind spots can form if they're too strict of an adherence to historical protocols without recognizing changes to the environment. In the case of NASA, developing and employing training drills that use different sets of conditions that may have not been experienced prior by staff would be useful. In the role of ethics and individual responsibility, as Gilman and Lewis points out, a public manager's first task is to fix the problem and only secondarily to fix the blame. The Columbia incident demonstrates the need for ethical, responsible individuals to operate within ethical, supportive organizations. The German philosopher Kant believed that there were a supreme principle of morality, and he refers to it as the categorical imperative. The categorical imperative commands without reference to or connection to any other purpose. Regardless of the environment or the end result, the public manager or worker has an ethical responsibility to do the right thing for the sake of action itself. One issue that existed at NASA was the culture of avoiding blame. Prior to a launch, a large increase in perceived issues and concerns were reported to management. Of course, this large amount of information caused too much traffic within the complicated communication channels. Therefore, had there been important verifiable issues pertaining to the launch, they would have been drowned out. While an employee could justify their concerns as in the best interest of the mission, the action was driven by self-preservation and therefore not true moral or ethical reasons. Gilman and Lewis state that ethical principles are guided to actions, a way to operationalize values and cue behaviors to benefit the greater good. These actions point to individual responsibility and demand for individual judgment. Due to the complexity of work performed by the public sector, a level of trust must be given to public workers, as no manual could ever consider every situation, especially in the case of a complex entity such as NASA. A different way to look at it is when the agency may be experiencing mission drift, as mentioned previously, and/or management decisions are legitimately not aligned with the public good. In these situations, public managers must feel pressure to compromise their personal values and standards of behavior. In the case of NASA, employees may have compromised their own standards regarding safety by not reporting data-informed decisions as a result of culture that played down problems. In conclusion, people by nature, for the most part, want to do the right thing. As public managers, we must create supportive environments that allow employees to contribute their own personal values and standards that maximize their competence to achieve the mission of the organization, which should always be for societal good. The message for managers is that the sum is stronger than its parts. We have a responsibility to ensure that organizational culture holds the highest of ethical standards, as employees will identify strongly with them and adapt their behaviors to align. If the culture is not ethical, conflicts will exist and outcomes will be negative, as in the case of the Columbia mission. Thank you.